In the heart of ancient Egypt, a prophecy loomed like a shadow over the land. It foretold of a time when chaos would rise, marked by the turning of the sacred Nile into a river of blood. Passed down through generations, the prophecy warned that when the sun no longer blessed the kingdom and darkness crept across the sands, only a chosen one could restore balance. Priests whispered of omens hidden in the stars, signs of a trial that would test the kingdom's fate. Though its origins were unknown, its warning hung heavy, waiting for its time to come. In a forgotten corner of the palace garden, a golden scarab lay buried beneath the soft soil, hidden for centuries. Unseen by all, it waited for the day fate would call upon its power. That day had come. As a soft breeze rustled the palms, Neferu, a young servant girl, wandered through the garden, her mind weighed down by the burdens of her station. Her gaze fell upon the shimmering scarab, half buried but glowing faintly. Drawn by a strange compulsion, she reached out and touched it. A pulse of warmth spread through her hand. The scarab had chosen her. Neferu gasped as the golden scarab pulsed with light, its warmth wrapping around her like a whisper carried on the desert breeze. In that moment, she heard a voice not loud, but ancient and distant, like the shifting sands. The words were cryptic, fragments she couldn't fully understand. She clutched the scarab tightly, her pulse quickening. The voice grew louder, more urgent, revealing visions of chaos, a kingdom falling into despair. Though fear gripped her, she knew these whispers came from the gods themselves. The burden of destiny was settling upon her, a calling she could neither resist nor escape. As Neferu stood in shock, the sky above the palace began to change. The golden hues of the sun dimmed, replaced by a deep, ominous red. Clouds swirled like ink in water, casting eerie shadows over the city. Priests rushed to temple rooftops, their faces pale with terror as they beheld the darkened sky, an unmistakable omen. In the marketplace, people cried out, shielding their eyes from the burning red glow. Whispers of the ancient prophecy swept through the crowds, carried by panic. Neferu trembled as the scarab in her hand glowed brighter, a silent command urging her forward. Neferu's heart raced as the weight of destiny pressed down on her. The voice within the scarab, once fragmented, now spoke clearly. She was the chosen one, destined to confront the coming darkness and restore peace to her land. Panic gripped her, but the voice did not waver. It urged her to act, to be brave, to carry the burden given by the gods. Though fear threatened to overwhelm her, she clenched her fist around the scarab and took a deep breath. She would not turn away from her fate. She was chosen, and she would not fail. Neferu moved through the grand halls of the Pharaoh's palace, careful to keep her head down. The towering columns and golden murals depicted the gods and great rulers of Egypt, but she felt no connection to them. She was merely a servant, born into a life of toil. Each day she scrubbed the temple floors, carried baskets of fruit, and tended to the nobles who never spared her a glance. The other servants whispered about her, calling her strange, different. Some said she had the eyes of someone meant for greater things, but Neferu knew better than to believe in such foolish dreams. Life in the palace was cruel to those without power. She had no family, no future, only endless days of servitude. Her only comfort came from an old scribe named Mentuhotep, a man who had once advised the pharaoh but now spent his days copying ancient texts. He spoke kindly to her, often sharing stories of the gods and their chosen warriors. Though she enjoyed listening, she never imagined such tales would hold any meaning for her. She was nothing more than a girl lost in the shadows of the mighty. But deep in her heart, something stirred. A longing for something beyond the palace walls, beyond the life she had always known. She did not yet understand it, but fate was already moving. The golden scarab had not chosen her by chance. While Neferu toiled away unnoticed, dark forces were at work within the kingdom. Sethnakht, the pharaoh's most trusted vizier, moved through the palace halls with purpose. His power had grown over the years, his influence stretching into every corner of the court. To the people, he was a loyal servant of Pharaoh, a man of wisdom and strength. But in secret, he had sworn allegiance to a far darker force. For years, whispers of a forbidden cult had spread through the kingdom. It was said that those who worshipped Apep, the great serpent of chaos, sought to unravel the order of Ma'at and bring eternal darkness upon the land. Most dismissed such rumors as fear-mongering, but the truth was far worse than anyone imagined. Sethnakht had long abandoned his loyalty to the gods of Egypt. He sought power beyond mortal limits, and Apep had promised it to him. Through dark rituals and forbidden knowledge, he had begun the process of summoning the serpent's essence into the mortal world. But such power came at a cost. The signs of Apep's growing influence had already begun. The Nile's waters receded, crops withered under the sun, and an eerie silence fell over the land at night. The people grew fearful, sensing that something unnatural was at hand. Yet Pharaoh remained unaware of the true threat. Sethnakht played the role of the loyal advisor, whispering carefully chosen words to guide the ruler's thoughts. Soon he would strike. And when he did, no one, not even the gods, would stand in his way. But the gods had already chosen their champion, even if she did not yet know it. Neferu lay awake on her straw mat, staring at the ceiling of the servants' quarters. The golden scarab rested in her palm, its glow faint but steady. She had hidden it beneath her tunic all day, afraid that someone would see and take it from her. But even now, alone in the dark, she felt its power. A soft hum filled the air, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. Neferu sat up, heart pounding. The voice from earlier returned, clearer than before. It was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It spoke in words she did not fully understand, yet their meaning was unmistakable. Danger was coming. The pharaoh was in peril. The kingdom stood on the edge of chaos. She clutched the scarab tighter, trying to silence the fear rising in her chest. How could she, a mere servant, do anything to stop whatever evil threatened the land? This was the pharaoh's concern, the high priest's duty, the warrior's battle. She was no one, yet the scarab pulsed against her skin, filling her with warmth, with certainty. The gods had chosen her. She had to do something. Neferu rose to her feet, determination hardening in her chest. Tomorrow, she would go to the high priest of Ra and tell him what she had seen. She would show him the scarab, explain the whispers, plead for him to listen. But fate is never kind, and destiny does not wait. As she stepped toward the door, a shadow moved outside her chamber. Someone had been watching her. The battle for Egypt's future had already begun. Neferu's heart pounded as she clutched the golden scarab beneath her tunic. The whispers from the gods still echoed in her mind, their voices filled with urgency. The palace walls, once a place of safety, now felt like a cage closing around her. The shadow she had seen outside her chamber haunted her thoughts. Someone had been watching. Someone knew. She had to leave. She crept through the servants' corridors, careful to stay hidden in the darkness. The palace was alive. Even at night, guards patrolled the halls, their torches casting long shadows. The scent of burning oil and incense lingered in the air. She moved silently, her bare feet making no sound against the cool stone floor. Every step felt heavier, burdened by the weight of the unknown. The scarab pulsed against her skin, as if guiding her, leading her toward an unseen path. When she reached the main gates, her breath caught. 2 guards stood at their posts, their eyes scanning the courtyard. Escape seemed impossible. Then the scarab glowed. A faint, golden shimmer spread through the air. The guards suddenly stiffened, their gazes turning distant, their bodies rigid as if trapped in a dream. The torches flickered, dimming as the golden light swirled around them. Neferu seized the moment. She ran. The cool night air hit her face as she crossed the threshold, leaving the palace behind. Beyond the city walls, the vast desert stretched before her, endless and empty. The sky above was filled with stars, shimmering like watchful eyes. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she had to follow the light. And so, she ran into the unknown. Neferu had walked for hours, the desert wind whipping against her skin. The scarab's glow never faded, leading her forward like a beacon in the night. The sands stretched endlessly, golden dunes shifting with the wind. She had left behind everything she had ever known, but there was no turning back now. Then, rising from the horizon, she saw it, an ancient temple half buried in the dunes. Its great pillars stood against the test of time, though the stone was cracked and worn. Symbols of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, adorned the entrance. The sight stole her breath. She had heard of such places, hidden temples said to hold the wisdom of the gods, but no one had set foot in them for centuries. She stepped inside. The air within was cool, untouched by the desert heat. The walls were covered in inscriptions, their meanings lost to time. Then, as she moved deeper, a voice rang out. "Prove your heart is pure." Neferu's breath caught. The room before her was vast, with 3 separate pathways leading into darkness. She knew this was a test. The path of the just would guide her forward. The others would lead to ruin. She closed her eyes, letting the scarab's warmth guide her. A pulse of energy directed her to the rightmost path. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. The moment she did, the walls shifted. The torches lining the hall flared to life, illuminating the passage ahead. She had chosen correctly, but the trials were not over yet. Neferu moved cautiously through the temple's winding halls, the scarab's light illuminating symbols and carvings etched into the stone. These were no ordinary writings. They spoke of a great darkness, a force that threatened to consume Egypt. She traced her fingers over the inscriptions, her heart pounding. Then, she saw it. A vast mural covered the far wall, depicting a man standing before a swirling abyss. In his hands, he held a serpent coiled around a black sun. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the face. Sethnakht. The inscriptions revealed everything. Sethnakht had long abandoned his loyalty to the gods. He sought power beyond mortal reach, and Apep had promised it to him. Through dark rituals and forbidden sacrifices, he was preparing to bring forth chaos itself. Neferu's stomach twisted. The prophecy was real. The omens were not mere superstition. The kingdom was on the brink of destruction, and no one knew the truth except her. She turned to leave, her mind racing. She had to warn someone, find a way to stop this before it was too late. But just as she stepped away, a cold breeze swept through the chamber. The torches flickered, shadows shifted. Neferu froze as figures emerged from the darkness. Their eyes glowed red, their forms barely human. They wore tattered robes, their bodies moving unnaturally as if controlled by an unseen force. Sethnakht's minions, She was not alone in the temple. They had been waiting. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She clutched the scarab tightly, its light growing brighter. The air around her crackled with unseen energy. She had no choice. She had to fight. The city of Waset trembled under the weight of fear. Dark clouds loomed over the great temples, casting eerie shadows on the golden walls. The streets, once bustling with merchants and music, had fallen silent. People whispered of dark magic, of the river drying, of Sethnakht's rising power. At the heart of the palace, the throne room stood empty. Pharaoh Userkaf had been taken. His loyal guards had fallen, betrayed by those who had secretly sworn allegiance to Sethnakht. The vizier had seized control, declaring himself the true ruler of Egypt. He spoke of new gods, of a world shaped by chaos, of a kingdom that would no longer bow to the old ways. In the temple courtyards, the high priest and his followers had been forced to kneel before Sethnakht's warriors. Statues of Ra, Osiris, and Ma'at were defaced, their golden faces smeared with ash. Fear spread like wildfire, for the people knew without Pharaoh, without the gods, who would protect them. Neferu had seen it all from the rooftops, her heart pounding. The city she had known since childhood had turned into a nightmare. She had hoped she could stop this before it began, but she had been too late. Now, Pharaoh was imprisoned, and the kingdom was at the mercy of a man who had forsaken the gods. But all was not lost. She clutched the glowing scarab in her hand. The whispers of the gods filled her mind, urging her forward. This was not the end. The battle had not yet been fought. With a deep breath, she climbed down, disappearing into the shadows. She needed to act before it was too late. Neferu ran through the darkened alleys of Waset, her feet barely touching the ground. She knew the time had come. She could feel it in her blood, in her breath, in the fire that burned in her chest. The gods had chosen her, and she could no longer run from her fate. She stopped in front of an ancient shrine, hidden behind crumbling walls. Inside, the flickering torches cast golden light on the faded inscriptions of Ma'at. This was where she would make her stand. Neferu knelt, placing the golden scarab before her. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. The whispers returned. Louder now, clear as the rising sun, they spoke of power, of sacrifice, of the balance that must be restored. She pressed her hand over the scarab. The moment her skin met the cool gold, a wave of energy surged through her body. Light burst from the artifact, wrapping around her like a cocoon of golden flame. Her body trembled, but she did not pull away. The power of the gods coursed through her veins, filling her with their strength, their wisdom, their will. Visions flashed before her eyes. Pharaoh locked away in darkness. Sethnakht standing atop the temple steps. A black serpent coiling around his arm. The final battle was near. She saw herself standing before him, the scarab's light in her hands, the fate of Egypt balanced on the edge of a blade. As the light dimmed, Neferu rose. She was no longer just a servant. She was the guardian of the sacred scarab, the chosen one of the gods. And she was ready. The temple of Ra stood like a silent guardian in the heart of the city, its golden walls now stained with shadow. Neferu moved through the darkness, unseen by Sethnakht's guards. Her pulse was steady, her breath calm. The gods were with her. At the temple's highest platform, Sethnakht stood before a gathering of his followers. The people of Waset watched in fear as he raised his hands to the sky. Dark energy swirled around him, the mark of Apep coiling like a serpent across his skin. He spoke of a new age, of a world without Pharaoh, without order, without the gods. Neferu stepped forward. The moment she did, The scarab in her hand flared with light, its golden glow slicing through the darkness. Gasps filled the temple as the people turned to see her, a lone figure standing against the tide of chaos. Sethnakht's gaze locked onto her. His lips curled into a sneer. "You are too late," he said. His voice echoed through the temple, laced with dark magic. "The gods you serve are weak. Their time has ended." Neferu's grip tightened around the scarab. The whispers of the gods filled her mind, but this time, she did not just listen. She understood. She raised her hand, and the scarab's light burst forth. The golden energy wrapped around her, forming a shield of divine power. Sethnakht hissed, recoiling from the light. The battle had begun. Sethnakht raised his hands, summoning dark tendrils of magic that coiled like serpents through the air. The temple trembled as his power surged, the torches flickering wildly. He hurled the darkness toward Neferu, a force meant to crush her beneath its weight. But she did not falter. The scarab's light surged in response, forming a barrier around her. The dark tendrils struck, but they melted away upon contact, unable to withstand the divine energy. Sethnakht's eyes burned with fury. He gathered more power, his form shifting, his shadow stretching unnaturally across the temple floor. "You cannot stop me," he roared. Neferu stepped forward. The golden light around her pulsed, growing stronger with each step. She raised the scarab high, letting its radiance fill every corner of the temple. The people of Waset watched, their fear melting into awe. "The gods have not abandoned Egypt," Neferu said, her voice steady, filled with purpose. "You have." With those words, she unleashed the scarab's full power. A beam of golden light shot toward Sethnakht, striking him in the chest. He screamed as the energy wrapped around him, searing through the dark magic that had consumed him. The temple shook. The black mark of Apep on his skin cracked, shattering like brittle stone. The darkness in his eyes faded, replaced by horror. "No, this cannot be." Neferu did not waver. With one final surge of power, she raised the scarab high, and the last of Sethnakht's magic was torn from him. He collapsed to his knees, his strength gone, his reign of terror over. The people of Waset erupted into cheers. The darkness had lifted. Balance had been restored. Neferu lowered the scarab, her heart steady. She had done what the gods had asked. But her journey was not yet over. Sethnakht lay motionless on the temple floor, his once mighty form reduced to a hollow shell. The golden light of the scarab had stripped him of his dark power, severing his connection to Apep. The shadow that had loomed over the kingdom for so long had finally been banished. The people of Waset stared in stunned silence, their fear slowly melting into relief. The sky, once thick with swirling darkness, began to clear. The blood-red hue that had tainted the horizon faded, revealing the soft golden glow of the rising sun. The balance of Ma'at had been restored. Neferu took a steady breath, her fingers still curled around the scarab. The whispers had quieted now, their purpose fulfilled. The gods had given her their strength, but the battle had been hers to fight. And she had won. Behind her, Pharaoh Userkaf emerged from the shadows, freed from his captors. His royal robes were torn, his face weary, but his eyes held a fierce determination. He gazed at the fallen Sethnakht, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Neferu. "You saved Egypt," the high priest whispered, his voice filled with reverence. Neferu felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had never sought glory or power. She had only followed the call of the scarab, trusting the gods to lead her path. And yet, here she stood, no longer a mere servant, but the one who had changed the fate of a kingdom. The people knelt, bowing their heads in gratitude. Neferu looked around, overwhelmed by the sight. She had always been invisible, a shadow in the palace. Now she was seen. But this was not the end of her journey. The palace was no longer a place of fear. With Sethnakht gone, the corruption that had seeped into its walls began to fade. The high priest led a ceremony to cleanse the temple of Ra, burning the remnants of dark magic and restoring the sacred altars. The people of Waset rejoiced, celebrating the return of balance. Neferu stood on the temple steps, the scarab still glowing faintly in her hand. The gods had given her their blessing, but the path ahead was hers to walk. She had been a servant, bound by the will of others. Now, she had the freedom to choose her own destiny. Pharaoh Userkaf approached her, his expression thoughtful. "You have done what no warrior or priest could," he said. "Egypt owes you a great debt." Neferu lowered her gaze. "I only did what the gods asked of me." The pharaoh nodded. "Even so, you have proven yourself worthy. The scarab chose you for a reason, and now it must remain in the hands of one who understands its power." Neferu's breath caught. She had never considered what would come after the battle. But as she looked at the scarab, she knew this was not the end of her journey. It was only the beginning. With a solemn nod, the pharaoh turned to the people. "Neferu will be honored as the keeper of the sacred scarab," he declared. "She will guard its power and ensure that Egypt never falls to darkness again." The crowd erupted in cheers, voices rising in praise. Neferu closed her eyes, allowing the moment to sink in. She had found her place. She was no longer just a servant. She was a guardian. The days that followed were filled with celebration. The Nile, once darkened by omens, flowed clear and strong again. The crops flourished, the city streets echoed with laughter, and the temples shone with renewed light. Egypt had been reborn. Neferu walked through the palace gardens, the place where she had first found the golden scarab. It felt like a lifetime ago. The girl who had once dreamed of escaping her life as a servant was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced the gods' trials and emerged stronger. But she knew her journey was far from over. The scarab, still warm in her palm, pulsed gently. The gods were not finished with her yet. Though she had restored balance, there would always be those who sought to disrupt it. She had seen the darkness that lurked in the hearts of men, and she knew that her duty was not just to guard the scarab, but to guard Egypt itself. As the sun rose over the horizon, Neferu stood tall, her gaze steady. She had been chosen not just to save her kingdom, but to protect it for all time. And so, with the scarab's light guiding her way, she stepped forward, ready for whatever lay ahead. The legend of the keeper of the sacred scarab had only just begun.